Welcome back, everybody, to me talking about the Wheel of Time, and it's time to finish Towers of Midnight. So this is about the rest of the book, which is, I guess, chapter 49 to 57 and an epilogue, something like that. We'll find out how this will work in, during this all of this, and I'll obviously give a bit of like my general thoughts on the book after we've gone through what's happening at the rest of all of this. So yeah, there we are. Let's do this. And different beer today because my shop ran out of the stuff that I usually drink. So this is what you get today. Cheers. So, what remains to be looked at? Well, Avienda, doing Avienda things, a little bit of Elaine stuff, and then a shit ton of snakes and foxes. We're finally back with the Aelfin and Eelfin, and that's sort of like the main thing that we have to look at here. And, a little around that, but that's like the big ones that we should look at. And I guess it's time to start with Avienda. Yeah. So we got like 2 chapters of Avienda doing the thing. So she goes back to Rodion, wanders through those glass pillars to see the past of the Aiel, like everyone else, which is no longer a big surprise because we already know that stuff. And then, for reasons that are not quite clear, or not exactly the best thought out, she goes and tries again, and then she gets a different view, which is sort of the future of the Aiel, or maybe a possible future of the Aiel. And it is told in the same way that we have had in the Shadow Rising, when Rand had like these like jumps of like different lives, and it kind of goes the same way. Kinda. And we find out that the Aiel lose all their integrity or like sense of being after the end of Rand the last battle, and are in a continual war against the Shanshan, and are basically killed on over the long run and live out there in the waste and die out and everything. Pretty rough shit. And the question is then, for Avienda, of course, how do we preserve our sense of self and keep all of that shit going so we will not arrive at that specific future of the Aiel? Nice one. I like all of that. I mean, there's like one important aspect in there that I'm not quite sure if if there is a little self-criticism, a self-awareness there or not. But the question there was like that like Rand or the Dragon Reborn had plans for every nation and everyone, but not for the Aiel, and the Aiel are kind of lost at the end. They were just like used up, like always when you have your group out there and somewhere that you use as strike forces against whatever you need, and then you still, prevent them from having Kurdistan, basically. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And that's a valid criticism, because at the end of the day, it's also a valid criticism of how the Aiel are treated by first Robert Jordan and now Brandon Sanderson, which is why I said maybe there's a bit of like awareness in there. Because Rand just goes and takes the Aiel and uses them as a tool, which, to be fair, he pretends to do that to just about everyone all the time, but he has sort of changed his ways. But so far, not about the Aiel. We'll see if that changes in the next book. If not, yeah, white men using up people. Not news, really. Not news. From a writing perspective, I did enjoy Rand's experience in Shadow Reborn, Rising, in Shadow Rising more. Maybe that's because it was there for the first time, so this one just felt like a bit of like, oh, Brandon Sanderson wants to write his like time jump scene as well, so he just goes and does it, which I'm not saying is the case. It may just well be one that Robert Jordan wrote, and I just don't know. But it felt a bit like that. Also, the connection, like in Rand's trip back through time, and I assume in Avienda's as well, through into the past of the Aiel. What I really enjoyed was like how every jump back was connected through family, right? When it's like, first Rand is this guy, I keep forgetting, you know, important, and he meets basically his grandfather, and then he jumps, and then you are that grandfather, and then you jump back one more, and you are that guy's grandfather. So every time the character that Rand jumped into, or whose life he lived, was already present in the previous jump, and I really enjoyed that way of linking them together. And either I'm too stupid or it just didn't work out that well. It's like, yeah, technically they're supposed to all be, kids of Rand and Avienda, or like their descendants in a way, but that specific link of basically meeting their the previous generation before you jump into that generation was missing this time around, and I felt that would have been cool. That would have been really nice, because that was really what made that scene or that sequence in Shadow Rising work so well for me, which it did. So that one was just like, it felt a bit like a rehash, so to speak, and I still like the idea, and I like the idea that the Aiel need to figure out who they want to be in a peaceful world or whatever. All good, all well and done, and it maybe finally we get something for Avienda, although I suspect that would just be, the way things work. Now, once again, Avienda, I mean, since it is in the future, after whatever happens to the Dragon Reborn in that final book that we're going to read next week, maybe we will not find out what she does, because Avienda constantly gets pushed to the side and can only stare at civilization in amazement and then be overcome by its comforts. And I really hope there will be a lot of Avienda scenes in that final book. I really hope. Otherwise, it would still, it was a nice idea to look at, like, how do we change as a people? Certainly a big question that needs to be answered by so many of us as well. It's like, how do we change as societies? What do we make our, like, so to speak, ethos or whatever? And what do we do if that doesn't work anymore? Like, one big example, like a brutal example, is obviously what Steven Erikson does with the Barghast in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which exactly asks that same question. And there you could probably, build up parallels between the Barghast and the Aiel, and how one of them works as a anthropologically sound depiction of a warrior society and one doesn't. But that's not something we should do today. I'm just saying, it's a valid question to ask. I just fear that the way these things have gone so far, we will not actually ask or look at that question really, because at the end it will just turn out into how honorable and how good is Avienda, and that will be it. All right. And then we have a chapter that I felt didn't really do that much. It's the Elaine diplomacy chapter, right? So Elaine wants to finally take over the court, the throne of Kyrian, and what it does is it shows a huge problem with the overall structure of these novels. So here's what happens. Elaine's like, yeah, you know what? I'll give some nobles of Kyrian places in holdings in, what's a place called? Andor, and I'll give some Andoran nobles places in Kyrian, so I interlink the two countries more, and that will help me have both thrones. And I really need to do that because relying on Rand doesn't really work. She does rely on Rand in the end, but, and that's supposed to be a genius masterstroke of diplomacy. Now, there's a bunch of things here that I find fascinating. And the first one is that That's not how nobility works. So here's the problem that I find. That is, if you look at, say, nobility in the 16th, 17th century, 15th century even, which is sort of roughly equivalent to what you find in like the Rand world there. Sort of, if you look at nobility in Europe, for example, that has always, the holdings of nobility have always been, nobility has always been a class and almost a, not only a class, but like almost a nation or whatever you want to call it to itself. Those people always had holdings in different countries. It's how we end up with these weird messes where, there's basically Germans sitting on the English throne and stuff like that. That's how we got there, and that has always been the case because nobles marry other nobles, and they don't only marry within their borders. They'd rather marry like someone outside those borders because borders shift over time, but those holdings remain in the same hands. So making this huge precedent feels weird because, like, I assume that, I mean, even Elaine has already like a claim to the Sun Throne through her family, so we know those intermarriages, like those exist in that world. But apparently, there's no nobles that have holdings in both countries. How? Like, why? Just saying that someone did not really think about like how societies work here. But I mean, we've already established the fact that this world building is shoddy as fuck. We already know that. So it was just interesting to see that aspect to it. Then there's other aspects to it, and I feel like one of them is certainly the problem of nobility within these worlds, because apparently being stripped of rank and holdings can only leads to suicide immediately, and I'm like, that whole idea has this idea that that there is something to nobility, that there is an aspect to being part of the nobility that goes beyond owning a lot of shit and being able to tell a lot of people what to do, which is what it is at its basis. That's how nobility works. It's people that have property, that own like real estate mostly, and can use all of that money to then push people around and establish themselves in positions of power. However, as soon as you come up with the idea that there is a code to it, and that there is a certain aspect to it, and that there's honor and all of this shit involved, you're buying into the propaganda of nobility. The reason why there's people still as monarchs is not because they're inherently better than anyone else, because they are true leaders of their countries, which they are not, but you know what I mean? No, it's because those are people that have a large power basis to start out with and then go somewhere else. And I know that is not something that you see with, only in Wheel of Time. It's basically how all of Tolkien's work works as well, right? Among others. But the idea is still kind of disturbing there. And yeah, as soon as they lose their money, as they're stripped of titles, they'll just go and commit suicide, because that's not how that works. And I'm like, okay, all right. Now we come to the final part, which is, of course, that it's supposed to be Elaine who takes over Kyrian, because she, can't just like have Rand give that thing to her, and but then she obviously, and it's even explicitly mentioned, she's like, you know what, this was already given to me by the Dragon Reborn. So she uses Rand as a threat and acknowledges it, which kind of makes the whole maneuvering outside of it feel a bit more like, I don't know. And there's an interesting aspect here that I want to look at in general, because it's once again a bit of like self-awareness there, maybe, on like how the series is badly structured in a lot of ways. What do I mean? Rand hasn't been in Kyrian for a while. I mean, time is kind of fucked, so I guess it might have just as well only been like a couple of weeks, maybe months, whatever. He hasn't been in Kyrian that much, and I'm fine with that. But it said, like, as soon as he's gone, the Kyrian start scheming again, because that's what they do. It's in their nature, in their soul. And I'm like, especially since he has like taken Dobrain, is that his name? That guy with him. So there's like the official steward is not there. So the Aes Sedai take over, and I don't know. But everyone is scheming again. And I'm okay with the fact that, yes, you have one Superman, which is Rand, who jumps around, takes over kingdoms, and then leaves them to themselves while he's off gallivanting on his own doing some other shit. I get that. And it's a fundamental problem that you have if you're writing a quest fantasy, basically, with a small cast of superheroes. And then let those superheroes end up, let those superheroes take lands and titles and all of these things that come with responsibilities, right? It's the fundamental problem with that, which is why, say, Lord of the Rings ends with Aragorn becoming king, and Sam becoming mayor of the Shire and all of these things, because they can't go on funny quests when they're kings or mayors or whatever. That's just not possible. Yeah, maybe on a holiday, but that's it. But Rand becomes king of Ilion. He's crowned king of Ilion in book whatever, Crown of Swords, all the way back in Crown of Swords. He's already crowned king, and then he just runs away and lets someone else deal with the country. Which, yeah, you can argue that that's because of the very special circumstances of him being the Dragon Reborn and all that crap. You can do that, but no, that's not how that works. So why is he accepting that crown, not just crowning someone else he does in Tyr, right? But that's sort of the structural problem, that the fact that Kyrian is supposed to be already neglected by Rand again, so Elaine can take over. That makes it, that claim or that construction makes it very easy to it shows that fundamental problem of switching from a quest fantasy to something that is way more resource building style. If you think it's like, if in D&D terms, it's like when you reach your naming level and suddenly your warrior has a castle to manage and all of that crap, and I'm like, shit, I thought I was going dragon slaying, how do I do this? And it's sort of the same problem that Robert Jordan is facing here. And so there's a bit of self-awareness there, and once again the idea that there is an entire nation that has intrigue written in their blood is abhorrent. National characters don't exist. They're stupid. They don't exist. They're a made-up thing to denigrate people of other countries. Always. And it's fucked to keep that in there. All right, there we are. Let's look at the Aelfinn and Eilfin then. I like that bit. I'm fine with it. It's fun. Why do I think it's fun? It's maybe too long and too explicit, which is, once again, a Brandon Sanderson thing. But I always liked the Aelfinn and Eilfin, that parallel dimension of people that feed on strong emotions and stuff. Really cool. It's a cool idea. It reminds me a bit of what Lavi Tidar does with the fairies in his recent Antimatter of Britain books, which, are fantastic. It has this weird sci-fi parallel dimension vibe to it, which I really, really, really enjoy. That's cool. That's a really cool place. And them going in to free Moraine, fine. The actual stuff going through it is maybe a little too pedestrian for me, because it's one detail, another detail. It's too detailed. It's once again what Brandon Sanderson does when he writes combat or action sequences, that they're they feel like levels in a computer game. I don't think that you should do that in a novel unless you're explicitly trying to evoke the feeling of a science fiction of a computer game. That sort of. Otherwise, use the strength of the novel. You don't have to do that. But yeah. So what's fun there? Well, he becomes more Odin because now he gives up his one eye to get Moraine back. I'm fine with that. He's now fully Odin, and Rand is Tyr, and Perrin is Thor, which, cool. See, I call it. Anyway, point is, they find out Noel is obviously Jane Farstrider, and dies, heroically saving everyone, and I'm like, all right. I will not ask how old that guy is and how he got that old, because apparently people were writing books about all his travels 20 years or 30 years ago. How old is that guy? How does that work? How do those news travel around? It's whatever. He's not Don Quixote, is my point. So I'm not sure I buy all of that, but it's a nice twist. It's like it was very, very obvious that he was that guy, like early on when he was always talking about stuff that only Jane Foster Rider could know. And he's like, yeah, he's a cousin of mine, and like, whatever, whatever. It would have been cool to have more made out of it, but we didn't. So there we are, I guess. Moraine and Tom are obviously in love, which I don't know. Why the fuck does everyone have to fall in love all the fucking time? It's like, why? And I like the way that, like, even Matt is like, how did I never notice this? And like, well, you didn't spend that much time with us. Like, yeah, but to be fair, neither did Tom and Moraine really spend that much time with each other. There's that scene in, like, what's it like, Shadow Rising, when she gives him, like, the information on who was involved in killing his nephew. And there is the stuff they do in all the beginning, like Eye of the World. And otherwise, they just don't spend that much time with each other. So how and why? But let's not ask. Everyone has to be safely married after the end of these books, I assume. So we'll see how that works out with Rand. I don't know. It's just like unnecessary to always pull, ram in that stupid, like, romance scene there, because why? Look, you can just, like, you can't just go and do, like, the rest without it. It's like, let romance grow naturally. Don't just, like, have everyone, like, bam, be in love and that's it. And, like, no, do it properly. All right, and oh yeah, we have the Rand being knocked out by the Borderlander stupid scene that I just don't get. And it's like, yeah, there was another prophecy that we didn't know about, and we have to do that to verify that you, Rand, are the right guy. And see, here's my problem with that whole plot line that was started all the way back in maybe Crossroads of Twilight, maybe even one before that, maybe even Winter's Heart. I'm not quite sure. Of all of those Borderlanders marching off to find Rand and capture the Dragon Reborn or a false dragon, I don't know. And it just goes nowhere. They show up from time to time, it goes nowhere, and then they just, like, slap Rand. Rand is, like, all, like, turns the other cheek, and then they go with him. And I'm like, all right. The fuck? Completely unnecessary bit. But then again, this may just be part of, Brandon Sanderson trying to figure out what Robert Jordan wanted and what he didn't really think about and whatnot. So I'm not blaming him too much. I'm just pointing out that, like, a very unnecessary plot line that could have just been taken out completely. Because even that idea of the Borderlanders, providing help for Elaine doesn't even happen because they get stuck in the snow. So I'm like, I don't know. Whatever. That's basically all of that. My guess is that the Black Tower, obviously, Mazrim Taim is all on the dark side now, and the good side is trying to leave, but they can't use gateways anymore. So we obviously know there will be another Dream Spike, which we already got hinted at because Moradin has 2 of them and says he needs 1 of them, and that's the Dream Spike that either consciously someone rammed down on the place, possibly Mazrim Taim, or no one knows really, but that's sort of why no one can leave the Black Tower. I'm 100% sure of that. And, whatever. It is not exactly subtle foreshadowing, but it is sort of foreshadowing. So let's not, complain too much. We get that. Lan has an army and starts to attack because he's heroic Lan. That plot line was, like, made, pulled through. We're all good. Rand is sitting on the fields of Merilor, and everyone is awaiting that big confrontation in the future, and we're good with that. In the next book. And he sees the soul of Lanfear, the eyes of Lanfear, and she wants to leave the torture of the Dark One. So will Rand be able to free Lanfear and Add another woman to his harem? Possibly? All of this we'll find out next week when we're getting into A Memory of Light. Yep, that's it. So, what do you think of Towers of Midnight as a whole? Slightly better than The Gathering Storm. Although, I mean, I still hate Fireball Jesus. He's boring and unnecessary. I did not like the more religious overtones that we got here, and I'm not sure if that's Robert Jordan's part or if that is Brandon Sanderson. Like, that whole, like, Nakomi scene. No. Why the fuck? If Brandon Sanderson came up with it, I'm pissed. If Robert Jordan came up with it, I'm still pissed. It's unnecessary. Why not have people actual ideas on their own? Why not let people have that? That would be, cool. Apart from that, I get the feeling that Brandon Sanderson was able to put more of his own style into this one compared to The Gathering Storm. Whether that is because there was less material written by Robert Jordan, or whether that is because he gained more confidence in his own abilities or his own, power within that weird structure of, Harriet being like basically in charge and there's a publisher around and whatnot, and you being hired to just sort of finish that thing and you getting more confidence or more freedom because the first book was a huge success. I don't know, but it felt like there was more Brandon Sanderson in this one, and bits of Brandon Sanderson that I liked or appreciate. I mean, like is too strong a term, but like stuff that I can understand, like why he does it. The more modern, techniques, like having the LAN through line with like his army growing, the cutscene, like double, like blending back and forth between Perrin and Gallard in that one scene before the battle, the court case kind of thing. Those are techniques that Brandon Sanderson brought to the books that just were more contemporary fantasy writing styles, and I can see that, and it certainly makes it easier to read. I'm good with that. I just really don't like the way Brandon Sanderson is writing elaborately boring gamey action sequences, like the whole huge battle in the White Tower, and parts of the Elfin and Eilfin thing, which just is too long. And then they run through another corridor and they kill more people, and they run through another corridor and they kill more people. I'm just not a huge fan of that, because I feel, how to say, if it's like super graphic violence or whatever, like you do in some more grimdark stories, I can see the appeal more. But since this is a very clinically clean sort of action sequences, there's like very few, there's no entrails in these books. No one gets disemboweled properly in these books. You know what I mean? So it's just boring. It's just like a, clean computer gamey, like you run down, they fight more, they run more, they fight more. And there's a limited amount of things you can do in that area, so it gets boring after a while. But if you wanted to write a sequence that feels very much like playing an ego shooter, like a first-person shooter kind of thing, running through corridors, shooting at people, and killing people, yeah, why not? I guess it's fine. But it's just it's a matter of taste, right? And I'm like, whatever. So yeah, it felt kind of rushed, especially since we still had chapters that just didn't go anywhere, and I'm still tempted to assume those were written finished scenes by Robert Jordan that had to be included, even though they'd go nowhere, like that whole Alejandra play looking at Berylane and Fael chapter, the drinking tea chapter, is it called, like something like that stuff. We don't need that. Maybe, that would have like helped with the pacing issues, but it is what it is. The build up to Hopper's death was unfortunately too on the nose, which is a shame. The Perrin coming to terms with himself and finding Gnome again as boundless, it didn't have any real impact because there was like no real hint towards that earlier on. So I'm like, okay, we wouldn't have needed that aspect to it. It didn't change anything. It's another bit that we just like left out because Perrin had kind of figured out his personal relationship with the wolf. So I don't know. there, it feels like there's a need in Brandon Sanderson finishing these books to answer every single question that is possibly open there. Just like the one, yeah, right, the one of like who killed Asmodean. So yeah, it was Grendel, but who cares? No one needs to know that, because the fact that she killed Asmodean, balefired him all the way back in Fires of Heaven, possibly Fires of Heaven. Just didn't look. There's no consequences. It could have been any of those still alive Forsaken. It would not have mattered. If you want to have a mystery there with Asmodean, it's like the last thing that I'm going to talk about today. If you want to have a mystery there, then make the mystery meaningful. I don't need to know who killed that guy unless the fact that they did it has further implications to the story. And it didn't. It's just like, yeah, one of them did, because they all hate each other and they would just like do that no matter what. And especially with like Asmodean actually helping Rand was like, it was obvious. So whatever. Who cares? Done. Why wait and then have like a small scene where you explain it? It's like, yeah, I get it. It was like because of fan pressure and whatnot. But still, no one needs to know all the answers. That's and it's a thing that I get like a feeling for these novels, these final novels, that like everything has to be brought up once again, one final time, to have that final answer, to have it all wrapped up neatly, even with bits that like you don't need to do it, like the Hopper gnome thing. No one needed that. It's unnecessary. Asmodean, no one needs that guy or needs to know who killed that guy. No one needs to know that shit. So I don't know. There's a final battle. We still need to figure out how Rand manages to just tell Egwene no, and we need to figure out how the Seanchan actually get to be involved in that action, because if they don't, who cares? It would certainly raise the questions like, why are there Seanchan in these books? And that's a question that we need to wait until next week to answer. Anyway, I've read worse Wheel of Time books than this one. I've read better ones too, which isn't saying much. But yeah, better than Gathering Storm. Let's see how Matter of Light, Memories of Light will actually finish the whole thing, and then I'm free. Have a great weekend. I'm gonna read some cool books, and I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.